Hi, I'm Carol Anne Riddell, and welcome to Book It. Joining us today is former Congressman Patrick Kennedy, a leading advocate on mental health and addiction issues. He is also the author of 2 books, including his most recent, Profiles in Mental Health Courage. Patrick, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Carol Anne. It's great to be with you.
So your famous family is often in the headlines, but what we really want to focus on today is your work around mental health and addiction, and also, of course, on your books. So as we mentioned, your latest is Profiles in Mental Health Courage. Tell us a little bit about it.
So I did my first book, which was my own story of suffering from addiction. And of course, I'm in recovery, so I still have to tackle this on a day-to-day basis, and mental illness, kind of bipolar too. I've also come from a family that's suffered trauma, my assassinations of my uncles, and then the whole ripple effect on all of my cousins that those murders had. And you know, I never knew how to speak about this because it was something I felt ashamed of. Like in my family, we kept quiet. You know, my mother had very debilitating alcoholism. We would never talk about it because the media would always, it was like they were out to get us. And one way that the enemies could get us was attack our mental health.
Sure.
Right? So mental health was like a vulnerability. You didn't want to talk about it. My dad self-medicated for his trauma. You know, he was constantly attacked for that. And so you just learn to be quiet and not talk about these things. And I think that's not uncharacteristic of most of us when we, you know, from all of my friends who I've spoken to over the years, none of their families talked about it either.
I think that's pretty traditionally been the way that it has been.
It has been. So it's starting to change. So I did my first book, and then I found people like much more forthcoming once they read my book. And then I knew that more people needed to talk about this, not in a happy ever after frame, which unfortunately I think most of the narratives on books are, I made it, I'm great, you know, it's all in my rearview mirror. No, these are chronic illnesses, they continue, and they're not always easy. And then, of course, your families are affected. Of course, families are never included in the narratives around people who suffer.
They are in your book, however.
But in my book, I wanted to make sure that the mother, father, sister, brother, their colleagues at work all contributed to the story of the person that I was talking to about their experience having a mental illness or addiction, because that's the part that the general public needs to know about. They all already do, Carolyn. I mean, they already know these issues, but we don't often know how to talk about them. And I just want people not to feel so alone with their illness. And if they read this book, there's 12 different people and 12 different families and perspectives. I think they'll find their own story somewhere in this book.
You know, what was interesting to me about it, Patrick, is that the people that you profile, the 12 people in the book and their families, they come from very different backgrounds, but there are some very consistent themes. So what would you say, to your reading of it, stands out as the most consistent theme?
In the book, the support and love, the unconditional love that a couple of the partners had for their loved ones were the things that blew me away.
Yeah.
Like they were able to say, I hate the illness, but I love the person.
Yes, yes.
And that's always an aha moment, because the one thing that these illnesses do is they make you so miserable to be with. And everybody wants to isolate you and keep you out of their lives. And frankly, when you're in the middle of these illnesses, you don't want to be around those people anyway. So it's like mutually assured destruction. You isolate, they don't want you, and it's all fine. But these illnesses get worse, not better, if you isolate.
Sure.
And so finding people who still love you in spite of your illness, to me, is just mind-blowing. Whenever I see that, I am so moved by that.
And Patrick, the title of your book, I know, is a nod to your uncle's book, President John Kennedy. Tell us a little bit about that.
So his book was featuring senators who had done something against their own political self-interest on behalf of the national interest. But when I went and researched those senators, the number of those senators who also had mental health and addiction issues in their lives was, breathtaking. Daniel Webster, he suffered from alcoholism, died cirrhosis of the liver. John Quincy Adams lost his brother to suicide and also had a son who had alcoholism. Sam Houston, first president of Texas, later U.S. Senator, was known as the Big Drunk. And all of these were people that John F. Kennedy featured. They didn't even talk about their mental health, right?
Sure, no, yeah.
They were heroes to our country. But why I wanted that is so I want people to know these are not new issues, obviously. We're very fortunate. We live in an age where we can now talk about them and we can get them treated, which is a miracle because people don't have to be doomed to live lives of misery because they can't get, treatments that can change their lives and help them live in recovery. Treatment works.
I want to talk a little bit about your first book, a bestseller, A Common Struggle. You start the book by recounting how in 2006 you slammed your car into a barricade outside the U.S. Capitol. You had no idea how you got there. Take us back to that time and how it became a turning point for you.
Yeah. So I got back from treatment for addiction after I'd had a DWI, like you said, most notably trying to go for a vote at 3 in the morning when votes have been closed for several hours, and I thought I had to go vote. And I came within just a few yards of running over a police officer. I was driving down the sidewalk.
So it must be so horrifying for you to even think about on something.
Well, I'm so blessed because I have had a chance to not have had the worst thing happen, which I take another person's life in the course of my blackout. And I know a lot of people who weren't so fortunate. And but anyway, I was glad I got the that treatment. And then when I got back to the Congress, it was amazing to me how many of my colleagues would stop me and tell me they were in recovery or they were addicted to something and they needed help.
Yeah.
Dozens of my colleagues. Now, what it made me realize, we're all anonymous, in this world of, 12-step anonymity. But the problem is, no one knows that there are other people right around them that are in recovery. But they knew me because I had been, exposed. Everyone said Patrick Kennedy's a drug addict, alcoholic. And so what it ended up happening in an interesting way, Carol Anne, is that for the rest of my time in Congress, I got to know colleagues of mine in ways that no one who's in Congress gets to know each other.
It was sort of safe to talk to you, I imagine, for them in a way.
Well, it's interesting because none of them knew each other because but they all told me about themselves. So I basically knew all my colleagues who had something to identify with in terms of my story or even as it related to their own family struggles.
And Patrick, you say that your dad, Senator Ted Kennedy, said, kind of something to the effect of, all Patrick needs is a kick in the pants.
Yeah.
But his attitude ultimately changed, right?
Well, my dad was of his generation, very anxious about any discussion, as I said earlier, about these issues.
Secrecy on these issues, right?
Yeah, so it was so brand new for him to think about talking about them or getting treatment. But interestingly, I was the sponsor of the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act. And so in a funny way, the way that I spoke to my dad about my mental illness and addiction was in the context of policy.
Sure.
So I was the sponsor on the House side. Ironically, he ended up as the sponsor on the Senate side by default because Paul Wellstone, our great, great champion, God rest his soul, his leadership was unparalleled. He died in a plane crash, and he was the lead Democratic sponsor. So my dad, as chairman of the committee, ended up being the Democratic sponsor, but it wasn't his choice.
But that must have been such a meaningful moment for you.
Well, what was interesting is I had to negotiate with my dad on what was in the final bill. And I was telling my dad, listen, my bill covers all of what we as our family have experienced, right? And he was very instrumental at the very end of his life helping me get the bill passed. And he got the House bill passed through the Senate, which was like, and then we both went to the White House to see the bill signed into law. And it was signed into law on the same desk that George W. Bush used to sign the bill, that President Kennedy used to sign the original Community Mental Health Act of 1963. So there's something in the fates that you never could have made up. The fact that I got to talk to my dad about issues that we never liked talking about, but did it through his language, which was policy and lawmaking. And then we saw this bill signed into law together. It was the last bill he saw signed into law, and it was on the same desk that his brother signed the original Community Mental Health Act. Like, I just think to myself these days that none of that's an accident. And, you know, I'm so grateful for having had the chance to work with my father.
I can understand why you'd feel that way. I know that you've been sober since 2011, so congratulations on that. But you say, and you've said, that recovery is a daily active process.
Yeah.
How so?
So I picked my permanent sobriety days. So for people who were like me, I first went into rehab at 17. I didn't get sober till 42. I had periods of dryness, but I didn't have real recovery. And I went to over half a dozen separate rehabs, which tells you that, you know, these issues don't get solved purely by medical intervention.
And it's not necessarily a linear path, right?
Yeah, and it's not a linear path. And in any event, I came to that point where I had a moment of clarity. I have to change my life. I don't want it to end this way. And I chose a permanent sobriety date, which I had never done before, and I started counting my days. So for people who are watching or wondering, how do I get the time, just to start with today.
Yeah,
and then
good advice.
The days start adding up.
Good advice.
Yeah.
You mentioned you have 5 kids. How do you and your wife talk to your children about this, or do you yet?
Listen, my kids listen to my meetings, the Zoom meetings, while I'm driving them to piano lessons or to a soccer game.
So they are aware.
Yeah, I've talked to all of them. And I tell them all that they're genetically predisposed to addiction in their lives because it runs in their family. It gallops in their family. They have to be really aware of it. And it's been good. I have to have these conversations now with them before they become teenagers. Like I have a 16-year-old. I've talked to her plenty of times. But the others, you know, 12, 11, 9, and 6, like this is the time where they might hear me. So when I have to bring it up again, it's not going to be like a brand new issue.
Concept.
Yeah, new concept.
Yes, exactly. A last question for you, Patrick. You end your latest book saying there is no health without mental health. What do you want people to take away from that message?
There's so many kids who grow up in alcoholic homes or grow up in homes where their parents are suffering from mental illnesses. And those kids get no help to help them figure out why it is they feel the way they do. And if they don't have insight to how their lives have been affected by their loved ones' inability to kind of have emotional, healthy connection, their lives are going to be affected for the rest of their lives. And so what we need to do is be really intelligent about doing more to help inform and enable our kids to know how to communicate and learn about their brains and cope and do problem solving. I think that's the key for all of us. And the sooner we build those skills, just like we build skills to work out, to be good at a sport or anything else, the more all of us will be able to have much more fulfilling lives that enable us to optimize what we can give to the world through our own contributions. Because the last thing I'd say is helping another person is, in my view, the best way to, you know, kind of help yourself because you're connecting to another human being and you're focusing on them. It takes the focus off of you. And guess what? We all feel better if we can do something nice for someone else.
Very wise words. Patrick, thank you so much for all your time and your candor. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Next, let's head over to our podcast studio to see what Isabel Ortiz has for us in Breaking Books.
Hi everyone and welcome to Breaking Books. I'm Isabel Ortiz and today I have the pleasure of being joined by co-authors Carolina Acosta and Aralis Mejia to discuss their debut book, Mamá Didn't Raise a Pendeja, Hi, Carolina. Hi, Aralis. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Isabel. Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you.
I am so excited to have you both here because I love this book. I feel like a piece of my own culture was in the pages of this book. So thank you for making me feel seen. So the title is Mamá Didn't Raise, a Pendeja, a book of anti-affirmations inspired by tough Latinas. Can you tell me a little bit about the tough Latina? Who inspired you guys to put these anti-affirmations into this book?
It was an anti-affirmation deck that we were considering because all of them are so like soft-spoken and sweet. And we were actually talking about a friend one day and how she probably needed an anti-affirmation.
A little bit of tough love.
A little bit of tough love,
Okay.
yeah. Because you know, we were raised to just kind of like put up with, you know, whatever it is that we're going through and just kind of deal with it. And so we kind of thought about those dichos, those like sayings, the ones that we quickly remember, the ones that come to mind very quickly. But then we were like, okay, well, if we're going to make a whole, you know, deck now book out of it, then what else is out there? And then we started to learn a little bit more about what other Latina moms say, and then it became a beautiful collection that wasn't just of our Colombian and Dominican backgrounds, it was of all of Latin America.
And I know, too, that the affirmation, I don't want to say it's a craze, but everything on TikTok, Instagram, all social media is affirmations, manifestation. So there has to be kind of a tie to spirituality when you're writing this book and putting aspects of your culture into it as well. So what was your background both in kind of spirituality, kind of the mental health, the self-help background, or genre?
So, we're cousins. Our moms are sisters, and our grandma, that was their mom, was very tough. So you can just, you know, imagine she was a single mom of 6 and such a long time ago in Colombia. Like, that builds some kind of character. We grew up believing in God. I mean, as we get older, I think we're afforded the opportunity to kind of explore what that means for ourselves. But I think Dios dijo, ayúdate que yo te ayudaré, right? So that means in English, God said, help yourself and I will help you, which is like the basis of anything my mom ever tells me to do. She's like, well, you have to do it because God only helps those that help themselves. And that right there is like, that's the anti-affirmation. She's like, yeah, it's beautiful to believe in it, but you have to put your best self forward to do that. And I think that's where it kind of ties in.
And there's also, there was a balance that we tried to find in the book that was like, okay, it is going to come off a little like negative sounding. Like, we're not telling you like, you piece of crap, you know, like you just do it, you know, but we're like, this is what you got to do. And here are some examples of like how it could help you, or like depending on the crappy situation that you're in or something like that. We try to add humor in there, so it's like it's not like we're hammering down on this advice that we're giving you. We're kind of just reminding you that you are capable yourself, but in that kind of more aggressive manner.
So is there one in particular that you both think of that really has helped you kind of get through the day, or one that you find popping up into your head more than probably the others?
I always like, como dijo una loca cuando toca. I just love that it rhymes. I love that it's true. Like, you just have to do it. I think we can talk ourselves out of things so much. And like, even just going to that event or getting out, or like putting yourself out there, like that to me is like sometimes my biggest struggles is just doing those little things. So that always helps me. It's like, come on, you have to do it. It's part of the main goal. It's part of life. Like, you got to live life. And that's really great.
And then for the viewers who don't speak Spanish, what is the direct translation of that?
Like a crazy lady said, when you have to do it, you have to do it.
They translate so funny.
And something that I really enjoyed about this book too was the combination of Spanish and English. So you have the dichos in Spanish, you have the direct translation in English for those who don't know Spanish, and then the explanation in English as well. So what inspired you to include both languages in the book?
I think we want to keep the language going forward. You know, I was raised in an only Spanish house. She is younger, her mom is younger. She was allowed to speak English. My niece doesn't speak any Spanish. So it's like, we really want to keep Spanish alive. And this is a fun way to still make a nod where, like, this is where we come from, you know?
And of course, the dichos are in Spanish. Like, we weren't going to translate them into English. That would be a crazy book. They'd be like, what is this?
Yeah, a little bit off the handle, a little confused. Yeah.
So we had to keep that origin, and, you know, it kind of grew very organically to incorporate some Spanglish in there, and, like, especially the description, because we could have left like the sayings in Spanish and everything else in English. But, you know, there's just so much, like, sass that comes from certain, like, Spanish words that we're like, okay, we have to throw that in there.
And I know this book went viral on TikTok with over 2.1 million views on TikTok. Was that something that you anticipated, or kind of was like a happy accident? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
It was just something that came out of the community of creators, and you know, that one creator who got the over 2 million views. Yeah, it like snowballed.
It's like a video, and I think she's not an influencer or like someone that we paid or anything, and she doesn't have this huge following. She just really loved the product. Her enthusiasm was real, and obviously people related, and to us that warmed our heart because it was a passion project, but also, wow, our words are really sitting with people, and then there's more people creating. So, like, we encourage anyone that reads it, that likes it, to, like, make a video, be authentic, and that helps us out, you know, that helps continue to grow the word.
Being both of your first books, your co-authors, your debut book, is there something that you want to continue with? Do you see another book in the future, or are you working on anything now?
We're thinking perhaps an audio book or some, like, fun planners or notebooks with the sayings and really, like, get there. And then a volume 2 would be amazing, of just more dichos, more... you know, chapters of life. So I would love to see a version 2 and just continue to throw out what I call, like, my grandma's sayings, because my grandma was really tough.
Yeah.
Hilarious, but tough.
I'm very excited for the both of you to see where you go next with the Mamá Didn't Raise a Pendeja brand or series, or maybe the next book. But thank you so much for being here. It was such a pleasure getting to speak with both of you today.
Yeah,
thank you,
so
Isabel,
much
for
This
having
was
us.
Linda Stasi is back with us, and as always, she has plenty to say about what she's reading. Here's Uncensored.
The House of My Mother by Shari Franke, the victim/daughter of mega momfluencer, now convict, Ruby Franke, is the Tell Some of It bestseller that has the whole mamasphere talking. Ruby Franke had millions of dedicated YouTube followers who were glued to her posts on raising her half-dozen kids. But as she posted the minutiae of their fake great lives, her kids were suffering under the constant watch of millions of strangers. Franke's book exposes her mother as a nut job who raised her children as though they were Bitcoin. Each embarrassing event attracting more followers and thus more money. People seem to think that YouTubing yourself refusing to give your children dinner or lunch for minor infractions or keeping them in the basement was good child rearing. What? Ruby Franke eventually came under the influence herself of another psycho nut influencer, Jody Hildebrandt, a life coach, who seemingly became her lover. Hildebrandt moved in, and quickly Ruby, quote, invited her dopey college professor husband to get out. The problem with Franke's Frank book is that because she is protecting her siblings, she doesn't tell what occurred that finally caused the cops to batter down the door, take the kids away, or what exactly her mother and her lover did that caused them to end up in jail as convicted child abusers. Question: why further destroy your privacy by writing a book and doing interviews about how your privacy was destroyed? Maybe it's because fame, no matter how terrible or fake, is the real opiate of the masses. Speaking of fame and all its possible horrors, Wide, Wide Sea is the riveting tale of the true last adventure of the famous British explorer, Captain Cook. The book, by Hampton Sides, which sounds like an exit on the Long Island Expressway or maybe like a fancy yacht regatta, details Cook's final and deadly expedition of 1776. Commissioned by King George III to find the Northwest Passage, Cook, who had basically retired, decided, maybe one more trip. It didn't end well. The book makes 21st century readers grapple with 18th century exploration mania, which often wreaked havoc on the delicate biodiversity of the places in which they landed. Size says these trips are now debated for their, quote, Eurocentrism, patriarchy, entitlement, cultural appropriation, and toxic masculinity. Of course, Cook just thought he was looking for a quick route. He didn't know he was being toxically masculine. But this famed British explorer, who was beloved by his crews and revered by the world, went crazy and abusive on this last voyage. Mistaken for a god by the Hawaiian Islanders, the captain ended up dismembered and headless after his crew shot and killed natives. Cook's crew, who made it back to England, delivered the captain's beautifully detailed maps of the Pacific and the Arctic, but left behind venereal disease, guns, and destruction. For Uncensored, I'm Linda Stasi.
That wraps up another chapter for us. Thanks so much for watching. A quick reminder to check us out on our new CUNY TV app and on social media. Tell us what you're reading. I'm Carol Anne Riddell. We'll see you next time on Book It.